Authentic Parenting is a free resource, and since 2015, support for this podcast comes from listeners like you. Your contribution helps cover the many costs associated with the production, hosting, and post-production of the show. This is an ad-free show, and donations are greatly appreciated. To make a one-time donation in any amount that you desire, or make a monthly donation, go to authenticparenting.com/support. Thank you for your generous and kind support. It means the world to me. I am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, overcoming trauma, releasing shame, and healing the body. I have a fantastic guest today for the podcast. It's Dr. Peter Levine. He is the renowned developer of somatic experiencing. He holds a doctorate in medical and biological physics from the University of California at Berkeley and a doctorate in psychology from International University. Dr. Levine is the recipient of 4 Lifetime Achievement Awards. He is the author of several books, including Waking the Tiger, which has now been printed in 33 countries and sold over 1 million copies. His latest book is an autobiography, and it's called An Autobiography of Trauma, A Healing Journey. It's an intimate memoir in which he shares his personal journey to heal his severe childhood trauma. He describes the inner experience of being guided through somatic experiencing to untangle his traumatic wounds. He reveals the mysterious and unexpected dreams that have guided him through his life's work, as well as his breakthrough on the path to create somatic experiencing. Dr. Peter Levine was dream guest for me, and I am truly honored to have this opportunity to speak with him on the podcast. We talked about how trauma affects a person, the role of the body, how trauma lodges itself in the body. We talked about shame and how to heal from it, the value of telling our stories, the role of dreams and spirituality in healing, and so much more. Towards the end, I asked Dr. Levine about the 4 most influential women in his life who influenced his thinking and shaped the development of his approach, somatic experiencing. There is a mention of rape in this episode and some trauma-related horrific details, so listener discretion is advised. Please enjoy, and thank you for listening. It is such an honor to meet you and speak with you. You know, you are this icon, this legend. As you say, you know, some people call you a prophet. And just to read the book, the autobiography, and to know the truth behind the person.
Yeah.
You know, it's such a brave book, an honest, brave book that gives you so much humanity and depth. Yeah, I appreciated the photographs in the book too.
Oh, thank you.
Especially loved the one of you as a toddler. It's so beautiful. You know, it's having witnessed your work and being shaped by it, having read your books and being changed by your work is incredible to read, you know, the many stories that you disclose in there. Because as a person, I always wondered, wow, does he have children? Is he married? Like, it's natural to have those kind of questions, but the depth of this book is just so touching, you know, about your parents, your childhood, the horrible things that happened to you. So many stories in here, but
also stories of transformation. The book is called An Autobiography of Trauma, a healing journey, and it's really about the healing, anything else.
Yes. It's so positive and hopeful. And if you can do it, so can we, right?
That's exactly the point, and that's why I wrote the book. Let me give you a little quick background.
Yes, please.
So I did not plan to write this as a book. It was only going to be some kind of a excavation for myself. Because I'm at the age now where I clearly, even though I'm pretty healthy and vibrant, that I certainly have less years in front of me than years from my conception to now. And so I really felt it was time just to look through the arc of my life and find the weavings of it, the trajectory. And so it was with that in mind that I wrote a journal. Basically, it was my own journal. But a friend of mine, very close friend of mine, she said, Peter, how come you're not writing this as a book? Or are you going to write this as a book? And I said, no, it's too vulnerable. It's too rare. It's too revealing. And she said, well, I hope you think about it because I really believe that it could help many people who read it with their own traumas and their own healing and their own telling their own story. But anyhow, I just said no. And she said, well, just think about it. And often when I think about something, when I'm stuck with something, I'll have a dream, and the dream will be revealing to me. So at this time of indecision of should I not, I had the following dream. I'm standing in front of a field, a large field, and I have in my hands, both of my hands, pages from a manuscript. It's obviously some kind of something that's typewritten. So I look left to right, right to left, and I just don't, I still feel stuck. I feel stuck, not even ambivalent, stuck. And in that moment of indecision, from behind me came a strong breeze and took all of these pages and took them into the air, into onto the meadow to land where they might land. And when I awoke, I realized that my dream, my unconscious had made the decision for me and gave me this dream to say, okay, yes, this is the decision. So I worked on it also with that in mind. And like my friend said, this is something that can really help people in their own journeys. And the commitment that I made to myself in writing the book is that I would tell my truth no matter where it took me, even if it took me into dark places, even if it took me into tender places, even if it took me into violent places, that I would move through it and then be able to also show how I was able to go also with deep healing and how we all are capable of healing. And we all have our stories, our important stories to tell. And so, again, I hope that it would be in some way an impetus for people to tell their own stories because there's none that's less valuable or more valuable. It's just it's just ours. So that's sort of how it became a book.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, giants like you, when they tell their stories so vulnerably, it gives permission to the rest of the people. I think it's such a brave and important. I think your work would have not complete without this book, without telling your story publicly. I think
Wow.
that's how I feel.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with me. I hadn't quite thought of it that way. But yeah, I mean, it took my whole life, took persistence, took courage, and that it was important to all of us. Our stories are important to all of us. So I really found that, because when I first developed somatic experiencing about 50 years ago, it was also at that time, it was something that you involved the body. How could you do something like that? That's crazy. Well, no, it's not crazy. And it really is, I think, the next wave in our understanding and working with trauma. Probably more than anything else, it was a testament, in my life since 2010. I've been honored by receiving 4 Lifetime Achievement Awards. And the most recent one, I think was 2014 or 15, was from the Psychotherapy Networker. And that's more of a mainstream organization, but they're open-minded. And in they have I think 3 or 4 every 3 or 4 months magazine, and the magazine for the time that I was going to be honored, that magazine had a picture. You know those puzzles with 1,000 pieces. So you could see it was a person with these 1,000 pieces, but there was one piece missing, and the subtitle was now the missing piece, the missing link. is the body. So I think in a way, to the question, have I done enough? I can answer, yes, I have done enough. And, I have a team of teachers who I've trained and other trainees have trained, and that these people are taking this work into the world. It's now in 44 countries, I think, and there's probably about 50 or 60,000 trainees. So it's off my shoulders because when I first started to talk about this and I wasn't really received or even encouraged at all, I really struggled with that. But now I have all of them with me and I can just let go and not carry this alone. So that was the question. Have I done enough? Answer, yes, affirmative. But the other question, the deeper question is, am I enough? And I think that was one of the things that I kind of helped me to answer that question is writing the book and telling my story. And I think that was, again, something that all of us can do for ourselves as a gift to ourselves.
Wow. And of course, you were ahead of your time with developing the somatic experiencing and, looking at the body. But I remember a cute story from, not cute story, but actually it's a bad story from your childhood when you were 7 years old, how, inquisitive and different you were even as a kid when you stole from this warehouse, this electrical pieces, the buzzer, and put together this radio, 7 years old, and your parents, slapped you and beat you. It wasn't met like, wow, this is genius. This is amazing, But I feel like you did show throughout your life, even as a kid, how a different thinker you were, a creative person and a spiritual person, which came through this book. And it surprised me. You talk about synchronicities, dreams, being this intuitive person and using intuition in your work too, and giving credit to your mom, who was an intuitive person. And that's so brave too. Not many people talk about those things. And I want to ask you, which I think this is a really good story too. What is your relationship to Einstein?
Oh, okay. Okay, so one of the chapters is called Albert and Me at the Beggar's Banquet. And that was a restaurant on San Pablo Avenue in Berkeley. And I frequented that. I loved the food there. And the waitresses were so welcoming. So just a few days ago, last Sunday, I'm doing a book signing at a real bookstore. And sitting in front, there's this woman. She looks like she's almost about my age, maybe a bit younger. And she says she lived on San Pablo Avenue and she knew the Beggar's Banquet. So again, these synchronicities. Here I am, talking about my book, and then this woman is validating that restaurant, because I'm always asking the question, is this completely how it was? And it was. So anyhow, now, again, I'm going to describe something which Jung called active imagination. It's really a meeting of the unconscious and conscious minds and go beyond that duality. And one evening, now I always would come in and they would welcome me warmly. And, usually I was at the same table, a table with two chairs. And they would start off by offering me the soup du jour, which of course I took. And it was also with this really warm French bread. It was like crispy on the outside, soft and moist on the inside. And it's like, because I was starting to begin to try to teach somatic experiencing to a small group of therapists, and also working on my doctoral dissertation on stress. And so with that warm meal, I could kind of like put that stuff aside. But one day, something quite surprising happened. And I'm sitting at my table, I'm eating the soup, and a figure comes from the left side. And it's an old man with crazy wild hair and a sports jacket that's wrinkled, that's like 2 or 3 sizes too big for him. And he points to the chair where there's the extra chair. And I said, okay, well, maybe this person wants to sit down. So I invited him and he sat down. And I realized, and he introduced himself, but I realized this was an image of Albert Einstein. Now, as a scientist, because I'm also working on my doctoral dissertation in medical biophysics, the biophysics department, I knew in a way that this wasn't real, not real, but that it was something like, again, what Jung described as active imagination. And this is a capacity that I did a little research on that children have, but adults do not have it at all. And I thought, my God, that is so crazy. Adults, we need it the most. And so active imagination, again, was an important part in my developing of my work. So again, we had many meetings over a period of a year. And at the very end, I would ask him questions. And he would ask me questions about my questions. This is what Socrates did with the dialogue, Socratic dialogue. And so this went on. And one of the last times we met, I was starting to work with people, and I was realizing that many of the things that happened to people didn't happen to them in their life, but happened to their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents and all of their ancestors. So I thought, okay, how can I understand this and how to work with it? And I asked in my active imagination, I'm going to make sure people don't think I'm crazy, but wait, this story has a different ending, an unsurprising ending. So anyhow, he took me to a small pond, like a dream within a dream. And he had in his hand a yardstick, and along on the yardstick were a number of small stones. So we went up to the pond together, and he twisted it, and all the stones came and fell down at the same time, Newton's law of gravitation. And then there were ripples that were going out in all directions. And then he showed me if where two intersect, if something gets stuck, then it continues to go forward in a distorted way. And not only goes forward, but it goes to the side and goes to the back. Again, that was Einstein taught us that time is not what we think it is. It's not a linear, thing. And so I could see, I understand it now. That part I could understand. But then I said to him, Professor, can you tell me how to work with these kind of things? And he said, and I remember this, and was with tears in my eyes, Peter, I don't know the answer to this, but I know that you will find it. And so again, I guess my active imagination was complete. Okay, so 35 years ago, I was visiting my parents in New York City. And I spent the day downtown looking at museums and, and exhibits and galleries. And so at the end of the day, I was coming back, taking the D train to 205th Street, walking up the hill, and then opening the door. And both my parents were sitting on a sofa, a couch in the entry room. And so I noticed there was a bookshelf above them. And I just briefly scanned it, but my eye came to one book by Einstein on the theory of relativity. So that prompted me to tell my parents, especially my mother, what had happened to me in my visitations with Einstein. And she stood up straight and she said something like, Peter, that really happened. And I said, what really happened, Mother? She said, when I was pregnant with me, I was 8 months in utero, and my parents were canoeing on this lake in New Jersey. And a strong wind came and tipped over the canoe. And they tried to right the canoe, and they weren't able to do that. And they certainly would have drowned, and I wouldn't be talking with you today because I wouldn't be here. Just then, a small sailboat came by, and there was an older man and a young woman. And they pulled my parents to the boat, gave them towels to dry up, and they introduced them as Albert Einstein and his stepdaughter. And my mother reasoned, and again, she could be so intuitive, even though she was, I really struggled with our relationship, that I think I'm blessed with some of her intuitive qualities. And it really made sense because she then said, and Peter, because you connected and bonded really with Einstein in that moment of life threat, he would always be with you as a guide. And she didn't believe in spirit guides or any of that. She was quite, a rationalist herself. So that kind of completed the arc on that one. Yes, it was active imagination, but there was a much deeper connection, something I couldn't have imagined except by my mother's willingness to say what happened and how my life was saved, literally, by Einstein.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating. And how open you are to this too, as a scientist. Hi, Hi, I hope you're enjoying the show so far. If you're not already a regular listener, be sure to hit that follow button so you never miss a new episode. I want to ask you about, how does trauma affect the person, the brain, the body? What are the effects of trauma? And I'll ask a follow-up question. I know your work focused on the body, but could you maybe speak a little bit about trauma's impact, on an individual, in terms of shame, in terms of the brain, in terms of the body, all of it?
Yeah, I'm glad to give it a whirl. When I started developing the rudiments of somatic experiencing, SE, at that time, the definition of trauma as PTSD was still about 12 years yet in the future. And so I didn't know, fortunately, I didn't know that trauma was supposedly a brain disorder, maybe even a brain disease, that could at best be managed by medications and by helping people change their negative thoughts. But so I didn't know that it's supposed to be the reality. So, but it was very clear to me that trauma is something, yes, of course, it affects our minds, our psyche, our brains, but it's primarily something that goes on in our bodies. And it's really through our bodies that we can shift out of the trauma and come back into aliveness and vitality. So, for example, you go outside of your door and you see somebody has been hit by a car. And so the brain registers that as threat, as injury, and it then just sends nerve impulses down into our guts, and our guts twist, and they twist. And then if we see the person's really, really injured, of course we call 911, but our guts really twist and they start staying there. And so that night when we go to bed, for example, we're laying down and all of a sudden our guts tighten and there's the image of that person being injured. And now, again, I'm not saying something like this is traumatic, although I guess it could be. But until this message from the gut changes, that will continue to replay and keep telling the brain and the mind that the threat is ongoing, that it hasn't ended. Now, we'll talk about a little bit about neurology, neurophysiology. There's a nerve called the vagus nerve, and it goes from the back of the brainstem all the way down through the diaphragm into all of the organs below the diaphragm and also to the heart and the lungs. And this nerve is the largest nerve in the body by far the largest. But what is very little known, and I think actually Darwin realized that nerve was 80% afferent sensory. So 20% goes from the brain down into the guts. It sees injury and goes, yuck. But 80% of those nerves, again, in the largest nerve in the body, go back up to the brain and reinforce that. And so it amplifies that and it keeps replaying it and replaying and replaying it. But when we get a new signal from our guts, from our viscera, that says this is over, then that's it. The trauma goes back to the past where it belongs. It's no longer haunting us. And it was very important for me to deal with Chiron, which is the wounded healer. And when I started getting very troubling symptoms and sensations and slight flashes of image, I realized it was time that I took a dose of my own medicine. So I asked one of my students, particularly bright woman, to sit with me and to be my guide, to which she generously offered. And in somatic experiencing, in essay, we never go right to the core of a person's trauma. That can be re-traumatizing. We really work around the edges, around the perimeter, and just touch into these sensations and letting them move through. And so what happened when I was with Guide, first thing that came up was an image of when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And it was my birthday. And during the night, my parents must have gone into my bedroom. I was asleep, and they laid some tracks from a model train set underneath my bed, out into the room, and then back underneath the bed again in an oval. And to say I was excited or exuberant really doesn't say the story. I literally jumped out of bed. and rushed to the transformer so I could control its speed and make the horn go boo, toot. And I didn't have the words for it. But in that moment, I knew that I was cared for, that I was loved. And I believe that most of us have had that experience of being cared for even a single time in our lives. And that could make all the difference. And as I felt that in my body, she was preparing me to go into something that was deeper and darker. So if you like, I can tell you some of this story. I can do it. It's sometimes a little difficult, but it's something I can contact and do. My father was asked actually by the person who was the Attorney General at the time, Robert Kennedy, to testify against this mafia don, a man named Johnny Johnny Dio. And he was probably the most ruthless of all of those. And my father was asked to testify against him. And he made it very clear that if my father did testify, he would find his family face down in the East River. So this was a mortal threat. And this was a threat that we lived with for many years, actually. And my parents never talked about it. They never said what they could have said, which is, you'll be taken care of. This may be difficult. This will be difficult, but you'll be taken care of. But we knew something was wrong, me and my brothers. We could tell from their body language. It's probably when I started to really look at body language, and which served me very well. But at that time, it was clear that there was severe threat. There was mortal threat. And this went on, as I said, for some time. And so again, it had a shaky foundation in the family. So it was like, that stress is like my feet, my legs were pulled out from under me. I really felt wobbly and weak in my legs. So the next image that came up was a park across the street from where I lived called Reservoir Oval Park. And I would come home from school, I would have my milk and cookies, my Pepperidge Farm cookies, go down, climb over this wrought iron fence, go down through these bushes, and below was a running track, a cinder running track. And I could feel my legs starting to come back as I walked around the track. And then I started walking faster and then came into a run. And in doing that and feeling that, it was like my legs were coming back to me. I had unowned them, and now I was reowning them. And I could feel that strength in my body, which I needed in order to take the next step. So you see how it works in a progression. So one day, again, having my milk and cookies, going over the fence, coming down into the park, I noticed off to the left, there were a group of thugs, and they were smoking cigarettes. And they had these Marlon Brando motorcycle hats. And I realized I was in danger. The hair on my neck and my back just stood up. But I thought, okay, if I try to run up and climb the gate, the fence, they'll be able to catch me. So I thought, if I run down quickly through the bushes, I'll at least be out by the track where other people could see, and then I would be okay. So I started down, but then as I entered under the bushes, I could feel somebody pulling me down and hitting my head on a rock. And so I was somewhat dazed. And when that happened, I was brutally raped. And I think the reason they did this was to tell my parents, to let my parents know how serious they were. But I never told my parents. I asked them many, many years later if they remembered that, but I never told them. And in a way, I never told it to myself. So I put it away from my awareness in a compartment, in a closet, and I left it there. And it was not until I started, like 50 years later, 60 years later, whatever it was, 55 years later, for the first time, I was able to address what happened with the guide, with my therapist guide. She really helped me find my strength back again and my excitement, as I did when I was with my birthday, and putting these together. And I was held in that way in deep regard. And so I was then able to, again, with her guidance, put that body memory, the implicit memory, the procedural memory, in the back, where it belonged, but not in the present. And so again, this was Chiron. This was me. I think all of us who do healing work, we really have to address our wounded healers. I think that's really essential.
Well, thank you so much for sharing it. Yeah, it was quite disturbing to read it. And, I can still feel when you're telling it my gut reaction to that story.
Are you with that now, or
No, I'm okay now. I'm okay now.
because I didn't want to disturb the readers?
Yes, yeah, no, no, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. No, thank you. So much I can say about that. I mean, you're demonstrating, your work, the resourcing part, right? That pendulation that you talk about, instead of going right into the trauma, resourcing yourself. And but what did you feel the effects of this trauma in your life? Did you feel like it was something was haunting you? It seems like you did have relational challenges, right, with women and sexuality and things like that. But besides that, right, like trauma lives in the body and all of that. Did you have now looking back, how did it impact your life, your relationships, your sense of self, the shame, that enormous shame that you must have carried?
Exactly. Tremendous shame. That somehow I brought this on to myself, which is something that often happens when we're traumatized. In a way, when I was able to work with it and work it through, it didn't seem haunting anymore. But at the time, when I would go to school, that well-known ritual of not stepping on the cracks. So I'd be very careful. And my breathing would constrict. But again, I had no conscious memory. I just knew that I didn't want to go to school anymore. And I would even pretend to be sick so I wouldn't have to go to school. But of course, I eventually had to go to school. And I think it was affecting my life in other ways as well. I remember pulling out my hair out of the anxiety, and then my father shaming me for praying. I was praying that God would save me, that God would help me, that this wouldn't happen again. And he saw me doing that and he made fun of me. I think probably he didn't want me to be shamed in front of other people, but it had the opposite effect. I felt even more humiliation, more shame. And of course, this showed up in relationships. And I was really tremendously grateful that I met in my life. I'm heterosexual, that some of the women who have been in my life have been so tender to me. And I've been able to reveal some of these very difficult parts of myself to him, well, to both of us, to she and to both of us. And yeah, and again, these things, they don't go away. You can wall them off, but they will come back. You never know when and how, but they will come back. And that's the nature of trauma, or that is part of the nature of trauma.
And I remember it was years ago, right, when you shared that the rape story with your mom and she denied your reality and she, in fact, dropped something else onto you, which was quite disturbing also.
Yes. Well, that's sort of what I meant. I had a problematic relationship with my mother. Yeah, I told her about that.
Were you an adult already when you, yes.
Yes. Yeah. I told her what had happened and she just stiffened and she said, Peter, that never really happened. And that's when you have something like that and somebody says and denies it didn't happen. It's also like a gut punch. And she said, and again, my mother could be unbelievably intuitive at times. She said, actually, what you experience is I believe that your father raped me. And so I was conceived in a rape. And of course, I knew that both were true, or I certainly learned that both were true. But it's difficult when somebody just says no and denies it. It adds pain and pain and pain onto pain, and shame and shame and shame onto shame. But again, when she gave me that hint about of when I was fetal or conception, it also actually helped me explore. And some of the things that I did with Einstein were looking at what happens in utero, what happens in conception, and how that affects the entire unfolding of our lives. So, and again, every painful thing that happened, she also gave me something valuable. And I appreciate that for her. I appreciate her. I thank her truly for that, for those gifts. Because I do believe that some of my intuition, which has been very important, both for me and my students, is that this is a gift that was given to me somehow through my mother or with my mother.
Yeah, and you also, I found that part in the book that it was really moving to read about the four women that influenced you in your life and the four men. I really love that part of the book. So could you speak about those four powerful women?
I'd be glad to. The chapter is called The Four Most Important Women in My Life and the Four Most Important Men. So I don't know what people think when they see that, whether these are, these are lovers or whatever. But no, these were not. These were people who became important teachers for me. And the first one was a woman named Charlotte Selver, and she had developed an approach called sensory awareness or sensory awakening. And so a really good friend of mine, this was around 1965, my friend Jack Kaplan, he was meditating at the Green Gulch Meditation Center in Marin County, beautiful place, right in front of the ocean. And there was a workshop given by Charlotte Selvers and her husband, Charles Brooks. And I wouldn't be invited because I wasn't part of that meditation community, but he somehow got me in. So and this was at this beautiful church in San Francisco at the top of O'Farrell Street with this beautiful spire. And so the workshop began. We'd all have to pick up a stone and feel the stone in our hand, feel its texture, feel its weight, feel its temperature. And this went on and on and on, feeling our feet, feeling how our feet contact the ground. I remember eyes catching one of the monks, and I said, "How is this for you?" And he said, "Big headache." And this went on and on. And then finally she had us lay down and feel our breath coming in from our feet and moving out from our pelvis, things like this, which as a scientist, I knew was complete kibosh. You don't breathe in your feet. Feet are for walking, they're not for breathing. However, at the end of the workshop, Jack and I stepped out of the church and looked down into the valley in San Francisco and to the Bay Bridge. And it was the most beautiful sight that I've ever seen. Everything felt alive and vital and vibrating. And then I realized something had happened. And so that was the beginning of me finding out. Well, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't completely disconnected from my body. I was doing my graduate work and I didn't even know what a body was in a way.
Well, you had left your body at that scene in the park, probably, right?
Of course, and other things as well.
And other things, yeah.
Yeah. So again, so this is the beginning of my journey to be able to heal that through awakening my bodily sense. And so she was one of the teachers. Then there was a woman named Magda Proskauer who was a physical therapist, but also a Jungian analyst. And I worked with her with breath and images. And then Ida Rolf, who developed golfing. I really learned from her to see bodies as they are in the present. And then the fourth one was a woman named Mira Rothenberg. And she wrote a couple of books about psychotic children and autistic kids called, what was it called? Children with Emerald Eyes. And she worked with these disturbed, and she would enter into their world with them and hold their hand and bring them out. So she really taught me so much of being there with my guts, with my heart, with my feelings, with my intuition. So all of these three women have really made this great importance. The four men were more intellectual, more academic intellectual, but still equally as important. And again, using that section to talk about the four most important women and four most important men, I wanted to give homage to those shoulders, those giants whose shoulders I stand on. And it's not everyone, there are other ones that I didn't have time to include, but that when I revise the edition a year or two, I'll probably put them back in as well. But it was, again, always wondered why is it that I was attracted or they were attracted to me, these people. There must be something about that. When I talked to a friend about that one time, and he said, "Peter, that's because of your karma." And that these people were part of, what's the word? There's a book, I think it's one of his first books by Kurt Vonnegut called Cat's Cradle. And there's a religion called Bacchanan. And the way they would know if somebody was part of their group, they called a karass, they would sit apart from each other and have their feet together, and they could feel that. And it seemed like it was something like that, that we were part of a caress, that they had chosen me to continue their work and to move it forward in my work and in my life.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. So is it important or how important it is to know, to remember what has happened in order to heal from trauma?
Nope. Short answer. No.
The short answer is no. Yeah.
But when we work it through, often images will come up. We don't go for those memories. Again, that's part of the seduction of trauma that we feel we have to do this. It's almost like a compulsion. And as I say, in working through at the body level, certain images come up, and we may have also, more of a explicit understanding of what implicitly is what happened. But it's definitely not necessary for healing to remember. But it often can be part of the process. But again, it's done in a way where we're not overwhelmed. And again, that's what I tried to do in writing the book so that people wouldn't be overwhelmed by some of the things that happened to me and that I describe.
Yeah, yeah, I think there is that balance. Yeah, it's very respectful to the reader in that sense. What do you want to leave this conversation, the listener, with? I am so, honored to speak with you, and I really enjoyed the book. Like I said, I really enjoyed the last chapter too. Living My Dying, if you want to say a few words about that.
I will. Again, coming to this time in my life where I'm now in the final chapter, the twilight chapter, I think they call it. And how do I face my death? And it's not exactly linear, but I realized I had the images of myself when I was 18 months old or 2 years old as a toddler, and how I was reaching for him to bring him into my heart as part of my preparation for dying. And if it's okay, I'll just show you one of the pictures in the book is me.
Yeah, I love that picture. Oh my gosh, just like so healthy, exuberant, alive, and pure.
Exactly. And nothing could stop me. And we all have that part. We all have that part. We just need to be able to contact it. And again, in any small way, I've helped you, the reader, in that direction. Then my work has been done. I was talking to a friend once and I said, when this is the friend who said I should write it as a book. And I said to her, how did that go? That I'm not sure where it is. It'll come back, I'm sure.
Yeah, so or that's okay. But what I want to know is like, do you exercise? What do you do for your health to stay so vital?
Oh, I move. I move. I dance. I like to just dance free, but I also learning to dance in tango, which is a very precise gender roles and cooperation roles. And I've been doing that usually every week, taking a class in that, a lesson in that. It's like a trampoline. It's called a bellicon. But instead of springs, which are jarring, it has these bungee cords going all the way around the periphery. And every morning, almost every morning, I'll get up, I'll stand on it, I'll wait for the energy to move between me and the Bellicon and me, and then I just start it to move. Sometimes it goes more in a little bit like you could say jogging, but not really. It's to connect more with the body sense, the way I had learned with Charlotte Selvers those 55 years ago.
Wow. Any regrets about the life that you have lived, like looking back? Are you one of those people who have regrets or they are like no regrets?
Hmm. I really have to think about that. I mean, in one sense, I don't have regrets, but I also have losses that I need to grieve. And part of the book is about how I was able to open to my grief. And, in America, we have what I call corrosive positivism. We're not supposed to feel sadness. We're not supposed to feel tears and grief. And we can't push them away. But again, when we push them away, they don't stay away. They keep pushing back. And so I think that the things that I do regret really have to do with grief and living my grief and knowing my grief.
Hmm. Well, so your work is not complete, your own healing work, and you're still have things on the agenda, so to speak.
Well, people talk about if you feel your grief and then it's done, or you lose a child, God forbid, and somebody says, "Well, think of all the nice things that are going on in your life." I mean, this is. Yeah, yeah, real nonsense. And grief isn't something that you feel and then it goes away. You live with grief, but you're not pulled down by grief. It's really something that, in different times, all of a sudden I'll feel some tears and I'll feel where those tears are coming from. So in that sense, I do have regrets, but in the other sense, I don't have regrets. I really lived my life, and writing this book was kind of taking my final stories. Yeah, you might hear a little noise, but don't worry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Well, I want to thank you for your presence, for your sharing, for your honesty, for your time. This has been a true privilege and an honor. I deeply enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, it was good. It was really good. I enjoyed connecting with you.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. As a regular listener, I am sure you already know one message comes out over and over again in our podcast, that healing is possible. I am curious how this episode resonated with you and what were your main takeaways. Please get in touch. Send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. Call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for international listeners, you can use the free SpeakPipe tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and send me a message. If you enjoyed the podcast and find its content helpful, consider making a donation. Your support is extremely important. Go to authenticparenting.com/support and make a donation in any amount that you desire. Another way to support the podcast is by rating it or writing a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to the show. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and elsewhere. And finally, if you want to connect with your fellow listeners from around the world, join our support group on Facebook, the Authentic Parenting Community. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.